Alrighty, we're back for part 3. I've gone ahead and collected some more reference material. I have a LiDAR folder and a FLIR folder. Well, my FLIR folder seems to be empty at the moment. Let me just address that. Okay, so now the FLIR folder actually does have something in it, the forward-looking infrared. So these are some of the instruments we're probably going to put on the machine. Forward-looking infrared to see targets and objectives, and LiDAR to create a map of its environment. LiDAR is a pretty cool technology. It's what they use on the Google self-driving car. It's what they use on this Red Bull DARPA challenge car here. You see the array of 5 LiDAR units on the roof, and oftentimes you'll see more of them on the front bumper area. They're pretty important for mapping the terrain that the vehicle is going to drive over. You can see this machine really takes it overboard. We probably won't have that many. The idea is that we want the LiDAR unit to be identifiable because it's one of the realistic items, I think, that'll sell the whole machine we're trying to build. But before we get to that, we need to work more on the core of the machine, which means steering, flywheel, blades, robotic arms, armor plating, and more armor plating. So let's create that flywheel housing. I'm not sure we're going to create the actual flywheel, but I would like to create the housing for it. Just organizing my front end folder here. I got my shock unit, my Buell machine. I'll leave things grouped separately for now. Easier to handle. So let's just start with a cylinder. Just going to create a primitive cylinder here. And let's scale it down a bit. Change its orientation to X. Y is default. Let's change the view here from isoparms to wireframe so we can see the segments. And then let's reduce it to 16 rotation segments for now, just so the geometry is manageable. Now the trick is we're going to need this flywheel to be able to occupy a large amount of space, but we also want its center of gravity as low as possible. So it looks like the largest we can make the flywheel is that, without making it too large. We can shift its center of gravity backwards like that. That could work, because there's going to be a lot of heavy equipment on the front as well. But let's cheat a little bit and put it low down. So if we go back to our perspective, we can just sort of interactively move this flywheel housing into its place. Now, not a lot of description is given about the actual flywheel. The book says that it's where the rider normally sits, and that's all I've got to go on. But if we move it around, we can see that there's a logical place for it. There's pretty much only one place it can fit. Now, in addition to a flywheel, we also need a spot for an electric motor. So just to visually balance things, I'll make the flywheel housing a little bit thinner and move it over to the right side. So the flywheel housing is now hugging the right edge of the frame. And then we're going to need a large electric motor to power this thing when it's in hybrid mode. The great thing about electric motors in this case is that we can just connect it to the existing drive system. So there would be some sort of a transfer case or gearbox here that would handle that. But to represent the actual mass of the motor, the space it occupies, what we can do is simply create another cylinder. I just did a copy paste, and we can now reduce the width, move it over to the left side. Just sort of make the radius a bit smaller. I don't think an electric motor would need to be that large, but it is a big, powerful motor. So I'd say that looks like the right dimension. And the electric motor we'd want low down. That's definitely going to be heavy. It's okay if it intersects our existing engine here a bit. So we now have something that sort of takes up the space down there where the motor would be. So we can just make it a little fatter. And that's our electric motor. So we can attach more detail to this object in the future. What I'm doing right now is I'm just creating some rough objects that represent where the extra equipment is going to live. So visually, I don't think that looks too bad. I think that looks okay, especially since this entire part is going to be armor plated. I'm thinking of like an armadillo sort of look of like interlocking armor plates at different angles. Sort of think the tumbler from Batman, but almost with curved panels. I think it'll look pretty good. So I'm going to go to the caps of this flywheel case, and I'm just going to fillet. So give it a little bit of rounding because it's probably going to be a rounded case, almost like a wheel of cheese. And we can work on that later. This is all just temporary. Now that we have the flywheel housing, the actual shape of the bike is starting to appear. So the blades that this machine holds should be stored over the flywheel, I think. Maybe a few of them on either side. Let's get started with some rough ideas of what that could look like. I'm just going to use cubes at first, and then we'll refine them into what we actually want them to look like. So I'm just going to start with a cube, scale it down. I'm going to want to instance this object. So I'm actually going to group the cube. That way it has a second object at its same origin, and we can actually rename the group to blade. Now we just take this blade and we put it up here where we want it. Rotate it a little bit. And then we can convert the cube to an editable object. I just use the C key to do that command. And now I can sort of start shaping this. Just to start, let's make it about that long. Let's give the edge a little bit of a taper. And that's going to be our blade. For now. Very temporary. I always thought it would be about the size of a machete blade. Not much longer. Now if we use the null object here to manipulate this, it gives us a really cool side effect. And that is that we can always swap the contents out or add more objects in, and it stays at the same position. So we can now use a symmetry object to create these blades. I'm going to go right here and create a new symmetry object and move the symmetry object to roughly the spot where most of our blades are going to be. And then I'm going to put this blade in another object because we need that for symmetry objects if we want to instance more than one object in here. So at this point we can separate them out. Now we have multiple blades. We can also rotate the blade object like that, and we can start to get a feel for what this is going to look like. So if our blades are stored there, I'd say one blade would be stored like that, because remember the robotic arms have to be able to reach back and get the blade. So without making the arms super long, the blades need to be fairly close to the front of the machine. We can then create an instance of this blade, move it forward slightly, and create a second instance, and move it forward slightly as well. And now we can start to figure out where our blades go. I'm moving the blades down so that their point is along the frame's edge. It's just serving as a nice guide for me right now. This is not permanent, this is just what it looks like right now. Probably follow the contour of the frame, give it some nice volume, and we can probably twist those blades later. But we're starting to get this look that this machine's purpose in life is a little bit more than just riding around. It's starting to look like an instrument of death or getting things done. Thinking if we sweep the blades down like this, they would look more aerodynamic. Almost look like they're designed to protect the flywheel and protect certain areas of the bike. And it's probably important that the robotic arm could reach any one of the blades at once. So perhaps this blade should be the furthest in. This blade should be somewhere on the middle, and this last blade should be furthest on the outside. Let's just leave it like that for now. I have a few ideas about how the blades will be accessed by the machine as it tries to grab one to equip it. I'm guessing that there'll have to be some sort of a mechanism where the machine grabs a blade and then the blade releases from the actual bike frame. And once the blade has been released, you can just pull it away. Now, this is looking kind of similar to my concept art right now. You know, I have that flywheel and I have these blades. The blades are probably going to look a lot better if we curve them. We can do that now, and because we instance the blades, it's going to be very easy to do it to all of them. So if I choose the original blade, which is actually over here on the left side, we can start to cut it. So I'm going to use the loop mode of the knife tool and add about 2 cuts. One here, one there. In edge mode, if I select these cuts, and then using the actual object's coordinate system, move it up like that, we can start to curve the blade. We'll also want it to taper at the end. So the same piece that I tapered like in that axis, I can taper in this axis. And we're sort of getting this look of the blade. It's going to be one of the interesting elements to tweak. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leave everything pretty rough. So that's what the blades are going to look like for now. We can always change that. We can add a base. Let's add a base just to prove that point. The base will likely be what the machine will grab when it's going to equip a new blade. So I've made a new cube and made it a child of the blade. And now I'm going to zero its coordinates so that its position and rotation are 0. And that puts it right at the base of the cube, which is now a blade. I think I'm going to hide some stuff. So let's hide all the stuff we have so far and just leave our new objects. We can assume that there'd be some sort of a latching mechanism built into this component. I'm guessing that they'll probably be a little bit thick, a little bit long like that. Maybe it'll have a few holes in it or a hook or two, but it needs to have some sort of a handle. And the handle's going to want to look very mechanical, so that when the robot arm grips it, I'm thinking it probably won't be a pincher robot arm, but just a connection, almost like a telephone jack. You know, there's no articulation. It simply goes into a socket, clicks, snaps, and then it's locked. So if we can design the arm so it has like a universal mounting point at the end, where all it has to do is push that into a receptacle, it'll snap and lock, and that simultaneously releases the blade from the bike. At that point, it can simply pick that blade up and go with it. But we need some sort of a base like this, and I think that's good for now. We're just doing rough objects, and I'm just going to call that base. So this symmetry object can pretty confidently be called blades now. So I'm not sure if the book mentioned how many spare blades there were, but one particular scene makes you believe that there were a few. It's important that the Razorback has these blades at its disposal, because oftentimes they have to hack and slash their way through a situation, and they may end up destroying some of their blades altogether doing that. So this way they have spares. How brilliant. So this is fillet or fillet. I guess it depends on where you are and who you're working with, but it can be pronounced either way. And it's just the roundness on the edge. I'm just going to harden it up. The cheese wheel look was not working for me. It's probably going to have a trapezoidal look where it's flat on either edge. I think that may be the best look for it. So I'm just going to name this Flywheel Housing. I'm going to name this Motor. Now if you have flywheels and electric motors and the like on your machine, there's got to be batteries as well. This is not like a diesel electric train. This is more like a plug-in hybrid. So we have our flywheel housing. Flywheel also adds gyroscopic stability. We have our electric motor, and we're going to need some space for batteries as well. This is an interesting one. I think the amount of hardware we've added already is much heavier than a human would be. So the bike is already overweight. But since it's semi-fictional, let's not let that bug us. The electric motorcycles I've been seeing have sort of a large square batteries, almost modular, that you can swap them in and swap them out. Let's just take advantage of the space where the airbox used to live. And let's just put a large battery there. So we can fit something like that. And this way, when a human needs to service one of these machines, he can easily swap the battery out. I think that angle won't intersect anything. So it's a little bit too long because this area here needs to be reserved for the arms that hold the blades. And you see we're running into the electric motor here. So what we could do, well, we can't move the motor anymore. So that's all the battery we have. That's the only thing we can fit. That's not going to be enough. Which is why it's cool that these things can have modular batteries, because that means that we can say, okay, if this is a battery, Let's group it and call this battery or battery module. And then we'll call the cube battery. Then we can instance the battery module and move it staggered. So it's at the same angle. Let's just store it a little bit differently. Store it down there. So the powertrain requirements of this bike have almost been fulfilled. We have 2 batteries, granted they're not very large, but the bike doesn't need to get a huge amount of range on these batteries. They're mostly used for stealth. And you're not going to be doing 40, 50 miles in stealth. It's just going to be a mile or 2. Just far enough so that no one can hear you coming. Now, because we're packing all of this equipment on the inside of these blades, it's pretty clear to me that access to them is going to have to be from the outside, which is why I have them hanging up over the edge like this. So the arm will almost have to swing around, click in, and lift one out. Lift one of the blades out. So that's good. So one of the challenges is that the instrumentation needs to be on the outside. In other words, we can't have blades blocking the LiDAR sensors. So I'm going to again try to fold these blades down just a little bit more. And thankfully, because of the way I constructed them, that's not very difficult. I can just rotate on the x-axis just to flatten them out. And I just flatten each blade a little bit. If we want to get really sort of sci-fi fantasy with it, we can actually make the blades articulate so that when the blades are ready to be used, they can all sort of spring into action like that, like fan out. But I don't think that's necessary. Let's just have the blades like that. And I still think it'll look cool if the higher blades pointed a little bit more out. It'll give it some of that fanning look. Make it look just a little bit more dangerous. Like if you were to approach the bike from the wrong angle, you'd get hit. And this just sort of increases the number of dangerous angles. So it's starting to look like a Razorback, at least what I thought a Razorback looked like in my head. The smooth tailpiece hair still looks a little bit sport bike and not very machine, but we're going to armor plate that stuff. And we still have a fuel filler cap. Looks like if a human tries to fill the fuel, they won't get hurt too bad. And I think in the effort of keeping these videos shorter, I'm going to leave this one right there. So, up next, I think we should probably tackle the steering mechanism. Because once the steering mechanism is in place, we'll know how much room we have for the arms that wield the blades, and then we can start to put LiDAR instrumentation on the bike.